morning and welcome to another episode of the Places We'll Go show. On today's episode, we have the amazing Nathan Ansell joining us. Welcome, Nathan.
Morning, guys. How you doing?
Doing really well. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Yeah.
Super duper. Well, I'm not going to let you get away with just that. Let me do a bit of an intro for you. So look, Nathan is the current Customer Director at Waitrose Partners, and he's taken that role and got to the helm of that role about 9 months ago. Has it been, Nathan?
Yeah, about 9 months now, yeah.
There we go. So he's in charge of the customer and growth strategy for, of course, what is acclaimed, the acclaimed supermarket chain. And he's already made an incredible impact with Waitrose, being a leader in sustainability, as well as focusing on real customer value through things like their loyalty propositions, as well as an amazing price reduction campaign that they had a number of months ago now. I would say that Waitrose is pretty much an instrumental, quintessential British organization. And I think it seems that Nathan is really no stranger to this type of business, of course, because he's already spent about a decade with M&S in a variety of roles prior to moving into Waitrose. Of course, he spent a bit of time at agency side as well. But at M&S, he was the marketing director, as well as the director of customer loyalty as well, and a variety of different guys and roles prior to that too. So Nathan really is a stellar individual that's had a fantastic career. And so I really can't wait to hear more about Nathan and his journey. So welcome once again, Nathan. It's a real pleasure to have you on.
No, you're very kind, Richie. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, fabulous to have you on, Nathan. Thanks for giving everybody your time. So where are we? So we're sort of midsummer, if you can describe that in Britain. The rest of the world is on.
It doesn't feel like that, Mark, when I look out the window or sometimes at our trading numbers, which just look topsy-turvy for this time of year. But yeah.
Well, that was a little bit where I was going. So the rest of the world is on fire and we're sort of deluged with rain.
Yeah.
So, you're in that retail cycle. But so is the world a bit upside down for retail through this weird summer?
Yeah, a little bit. I think on a few different levels, probably. I think customers are in a slightly tricky place actually at the moment still. It's confidence is kind of on paper beginning to pick up a little bit coming out of the pandemic and the crisis. But yeah, I do think it's a tricky time for customers, and there's just like constant uncertainty going on. We had a family holiday in Corfu a couple of weeks ago, and we literally probably just got out in time actually when all the fires started. So we were incredibly lucky, but a bit tragic for the people there. You obviously got war in Europe, people's mortgages. There are a lot of layers of anxiety, I think, for customers, which to some degree is playing out in kind of extraordinary resilience, actually. Like we're sort of realizing how resilient everybody is, I think, and we're sort of becoming a little bit immune to crises, for good or for bad. But on another level, it's very real for people. There's a lot of people out there who are struggling, wondering how to spend their money, how to save, how to keep the families healthy. But it's tough. It's really tough for people out there actually, and just on a very practical level, when the weather does what it's doing. Right here, it does send our numbers in odd directions. So barbecue's down, but we've got big massive uplifts in areas that you'd expect. Things like soup was up 60% last year or something like that. So it makes it quite difficult to manage a business through turbulent times, just on a really practical level. So yeah, it's tough.
I'd say it's funny because I'm currently visiting my mom in Spain, and listening to the radio yesterday, and they said all the Spanish are actually leaving Spain, coming to the UK. In midst of trying to escape the sort of heat wave that's currently going through continental Europe. So there we go. Some interesting anecdotes there. But I want to pick up with you, Nathan, on the thought around managing through these uncertain times, and particularly you're obviously managing what is one of the largest supermarket chains, and as you said, right, customer turbulence, topsy-turvy landscapes. So maybe how do you personally sort of get yourself through and get your teams into that mindset of being able to constantly, I guess, go with the flow as you're getting through?
Yeah, it's a good. Well, I like what you just said actually around kind of going with the flow, because to a degree that's kind of what it's all about actually. I think having a kind of sense of direction for where you want to get to, and having some of the change and perhaps some of the competitor activity kind of in your peripheral vision, if you know what I mean, but not necessarily being knocked about by it too much on a day-to-day basis. And that does take quite a strong kind of clarity of purpose, actually. Like you have to be really clear kind of what you're where you're trying to get to, what matters to you fundamentally, actually, as a business is really important. And we can talk a bit more about Waitrose values if you want to, but having that kind of sense of direction, and not allowing too much to get knocked off course by kind of the short-term events that happen, which can be a challenge. Having said that, there's a kind of the thing we would talk to the team a lot about, being able to kind of pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time, right? So you've got to be able to kind of work out where you're trying to get to for 3 to 5 years, and have that kind of sense of purpose and direction. But at the same time, if like I said earlier, if barbecue's down 40% and soup's up 60%, you've got to work out how you respond to that to make sure the shelves are full for the things that customers want to buy. So you do have to be able to react in the short term, as well as having a degree of purpose and direction for the longer term.
Yeah, I can never do that. Like pound my head and rub my tummy. Today, just never cracked it. But anyway, what matters to you is an interesting thought. So I suppose, Nathan, like what matters to you?
To me personally, I think, look, I mean, my sort of, I spend a bit of time, probably not as much time as perhaps I should have done or might have done, but a bit of time sort of thinking about my personal values. I think that the truth is that I'm very outcome driven, right? So I like to see, probably the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now, or I have done for a while now, is I love to see the impact of change. Actually, so change is I think a really important part of all of our lives, and I love to see the impact of that change and growth. So I like to see businesses grow, but actually there's a direct link between business growth and personal growth, I think. So if you can we've all been in organizations that are having a bit of a tough time and struggling, and that can be really, really hard for people. You can learn a lot in those sorts of environments, but also there's direction and beginning to kind of get motoring. It's an amazing feeling. And it's something that people remember for a long time. So for me, there's a very direct link between personal growth and business growth, and I like to think that kind of by achieving one, you're able to kind of, to some degree, perhaps in a small way, just inspire the other in a sense. So that's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning, really.
Absolutely fantastic. I'd love to talk a bit more about personal growth in this context. But before getting to that, what I'm fascinated about is, of course, in your previous life at M&S, where you've had a really good long innings, you were the marketing director. And now, of course, at Waitrose, customer director. So it's a bit of a different nuance to the scenario. And I wonder for people listening into the show, whether maybe we could explain the difference between what the accountabilities were as a marketing director versus the ones being a customer director, because I'm sure there's maybe a widening of the scope of the role in where you are at the moment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is in a way. I suppose it's in some respects, it's just like we like to have different titles, don't we, in marketing? So it's no difference to be sort of being the CMO of Waitrose or whatever. But I think that the difference is probably very practical on one level, in the sense that there's a greater accountability for things like customer experience, for instance. So being expected to and be accountable for kind of the whole customer experience in totality, beyond communication and marketing's with the store experience, on the omni-channel customer experience. So that's quite an important nuance. Extending into things like the physical estate. So we call it the bet shops, basically, to you and I. So everything from sort of how we invest for the future in terms of our store refurbishments, not just in terms of the customer experience piece, but the full kind of end-to-end customer experience and service proposition. I think probably customer service isn't something that most businesses really focus on in the way that perhaps they could or possibly should. And customer service is a very important part of what we do. So that's a big kind of area of focus. I think more subtly, perhaps, is there's a very clear expectation that me and my team are absolutely bringing the voice of the customer into the organization. So JLP is quite different to lots of organizations. So we're owned by our partners, which creates a kind of, there are sort of like three legs to the stool. There's the business performance, there's partner happiness, and then there's kind of happy customers. And sometimes in a partner-owned business, you need to make sure you've got a really good equilibrium between those three things. And a big part of my team's role is to really have a degree of velocity actually about bringing the customer perspective into the business. So that the short-term drivers of the P&L or the demands of the partner community, which are important, don't kind of overshadow so it's making sure those things are kind of really working well together, really. So that's probably the main difference. But in lots of respects, it's very similar to any other marketing role.
Well, it's good to distinguish between the two. Whilst we're on marketing per se, I suppose the obvious question that we ask many of our guests is, why marketing? Why did you get involved in marketing? How did you get involved in marketing back in the day?
Back in the day, yeah. So I was incredible. So I was doing a psychology degree actually, and I was kind of pondering whether I was quite interested in neuropsychology and the way that the brain works. I could bore you for hours, Mark, with how your Hebbian pathways work in the brain.
Wouldn't be bored. Anyway,
you might. But it's amazing. So I was getting quite fascinated by that. And then there was some Red Bull samplers came to our campus who were connected to a friend of mine, and they were looking for what was the student brand managers, basically. So they were looking. There was a new program starting that Red Bull kind of invented, which was essentially to say that as a Red Bull student brand manager, you were responsible for the brand. It's almost like a micro market in your campus. And I thought, that sounds quite interesting. Red Bull at the time was, going back to sort of late 90s, Red Bull was quite a new brand, quite small, quite edgy, quite interesting, exciting, obviously quite big on the student scene. Well, that sounds like fun. Let's give it a go and see what happens. And I was very lucky, managed to get through to, there were 40 of us, I think, and quite a lot of us are still kept in touch today, actually. And that kind of gave me a bit of a taste of marketing, everything from writing for the local newspaper to running. We did events, lots of events actually on the campus. Some went well, some went a little bit wrong. But it was you got extraordinary responsibility at a relatively young age to essentially grow the Red Bull brand in your market. And then we kind of went on to, I ran a Supercross event down the Southwest, and I became a sort of regional events manager for Red Bull, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. I sort of got to know the brand from the inside out. It was an incredibly exciting time, and that kind of got me hooked onto marketing, really.
Sounds fun.
It gave you wings. Da, da, da.
In a way, yeah, it did. Yeah,
it's funny because Mark often talks, and I'm stealing Mark's phrase here. He says it's not marketing's not rocket science, it's neuroscience. So there we go. It really is. But I want to talk about the role of personal growth in your career trajectory and being able to navigate as you've been able to move from Red Bull, of course, into your various roles and as you've got more experience in the sector. How have you been able to manage that? And what sort of skills do you think you needed at the outset versus what skills you needed today? And how were you able to groom those skills over time to make those significant leaps and changes?
I think certainly, if I look back to those sort of early days, if you like, in the sort of beginning of my career, there's a few things that kind of stood out to me anyway, at least that felt important at the time. I didn't really think about it at the time, but looking back, it felt important. One would be just energy, actually, just bringing a sense of energy into the business. I mean, I was only at Red Bull for a short period of time, mostly while I was a student brand manager, and I did it for about 6 months after. I quickly moved into work at Heinz, which is a very commercial organisation, grocery, but amazing brand. And of course, what you don't realise at the time is you're kind of new and curious and kind of a little bit wide-eyed about it all. Everything's new and interesting and fascinating. And of course, you feel at the time as though that's potentially a little bit of a disadvantage because everyone else knows everything, don't they? I mean, so our schooling system teaches us to value that kind of experience and knowledge. And everyone else knows everything about everything. You know nothing about anything. Like you come in, it's not terrifying, but you certainly feel like you're on the back foot a little bit. I think when you first start out in business and into organisation, and I think what you don't realise and what I wish I'd known now is that in a way that's your superpower, because a lot of the other people in the organization have been there a long time. They're perhaps a bit tired, a bit jaded. They might have, big families, all that kind of stuff. And there are things that are, that are giving them a different perspective, and perhaps to some degree a slightly worn out perspective in some ways. And what you can do as a new person coming into that business is bring a sense of a different altitude, a different perspective, ideas, energy, vitality, and I think if you do that and approach it with a sense of curiosity and kind of optimism, you can kind of stand out actually in that sort of organization. So you don't, I don't think you think about it at the time, but in a way that is your superpower, I think, when you're starting out.
Are you saying you're not optimistic or enthusiastic anymore?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I was going to go there. If those are the superpowers that got you off the ground, and obviously you lead big teams now. What are your superpowers today?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think look, part of our role as leaders, actually, and people always talk about time as a really scarce commodity, don't they? And it is. Right? So time is one of our most precious commodities. But I also think energy is actually an underrated commodity. There's a lovely phrase from, I think it was a Tesco phrase. People sort of say, "Are you a radiator or a drain?" Right? That's kind of people say that a lot. But I think it's true. And when you're in a leadership role, it's tiring. It's really tiring, right? Because you're dealing with you're dealing with problems. So often you're dealing with problems that your team, for whatever reason, aren't able to solve themselves. So they're kind of elevating those up. Or you're dealing with problems that are sort of gifted down to you from the board or elsewhere. And particularly if you're a bit more introverted. So I'm naturally quite an introverted, reflective thinker. A lot of the sort of more extroverted behaviors are, to be honest, learned, actually. They're sort of more like learned behaviors, and people don't sort of realize that. It's really quite tiring sometimes when you're in a leadership role in a big organization. So I think, hopefully I've still got a degree of energy, but managing your own energy is one of the most important things you can do, I think, as a leader, and kind of retaining a bit of that somewhat sort of like childlike curiosity to a degree, and trying to give yourself a fresh perspective. I always one actually quick thing on that. One of the things I always do when I go on holiday, I always kind of almost like almost basically fire myself when I'm on holiday, and imagine that the day I come back after holiday is like my first day in the role, and that's kind of a little bit my way of trying to mentally reset a bit, going back into the new world. So I always re-employ myself, by the way, just so you know, on the first day back. But you kind of like going into it fresh, basically.
I love that thought. In fact, I was going to ask about where you get that sense of energy, vitality, and curiosity from. Love the thought of holidays. It's holiday season. May not feel like it, certainly in the UK. But I want to maybe explore that a little bit more. So when on holiday, what are the kind of things that you would be doing, thinking about, that would enable you to have that sense of refreshed approach when you get back? Maybe stimulus that you use, I don't know, whatever it might be. What's your point of view on that?
Yeah, so what I try not to do is think about work, basically. I genuinely, it's quite difficult, but one of the tricks that I've started doing is I actually get my PA to change my password. It's so terrible, isn't it? To try and stop me from, do you know what I mean? Because I just don't trust myself, because it's too tempting, isn't it? Because once you're in it, you're back in it. And I've learned, you're just better if you do genuinely switch off. And also, I've got two young kids, I've got a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So, I want to give some time back to them. Right? I don't see them as much as I would probably like. So that's the main thing. But also, it is a nice opportunity to think. So I don't listen to any kind of work-related podcasts. I try and listen to things that are just stimulating, things that I find interesting. Sometimes stuff from my sort of previous psychology background, or I'm quite interested in politics. So there's something called the Britain Project, which is founded by the Tony Blair Institute and My Life, which is effectively sort of working out what's the future of Britain. And I was listening to that while I was on holiday, which is just hugely stimulating, lots of interesting, so it's worth a look. So yeah, try and get in external stimulation that you don't necessarily have time for in your normal busy week.
Brilliant. I'm going to check that out. Change the password. I mean, just to hover on that for a sec. I mean, that is the ultimate sort of self-preservation. But yeah, on the point about renewal, outside of holidays and more in the flow, my question is around how do you keep renewing yourself? I know you did the Marketing Academy Fellowship. Maybe that's was a moment in time, but more generally, how do you keep staying fresh, keep renewing your skills and perspective?
Yeah, it's general. One of the things that I think about, kind of things that I've not done necessarily that well, or mistakes that I've made. One of them would definitely be becoming a bit too internally focused, actually. So I think the lots of organizations and busy roles like all of ours, the gravitational pull of most organizations is quite internally focused, and you tend to become an expert in how to get things done and the organization, and you've got to find ways of just bringing the outside in, and that that can be listening to podcasts like this, obviously. But it's also just about going out and seeing the world and just seeing what's going on out there. And the holiday, we stayed in a hotel when we were on holiday, and it was kind of a masterclass in customer experience. And I spent quite a lot of time thinking about how are they doing this? Like how are they managing to make the whole thing work so seamlessly, or things that just aren't going well. Have you ever tried extending your rental car hire by a day or something like that when you're on holiday or whatever? Like, it's a nightmare. Like, why is that such a difficult thing to do? And I think just looking out into the wider world for inspiration is really important. As a retailer, going out and spending time with store teams is one of the most important things you can do. Like, honestly, if you want to know where the answers are in a retail business, go and spend some time in a shop. Like before I started at Waitrose, I spent a day with my old team. So my first job actually was in Waitrose, working in a shop back over 20 years ago. I went back and saw Steve, who was my boss at the local store down the road, and spent the day with him and the team, just understanding what was going on in the business. And that was the single most important thing. I could have read all the board papers. I could have sat and read the last year's strategy presentation. The most important thing I did was go and spend a day with Steve and Amanda, and they told me all about what was really going on out there. And that's as a retailer, that's one of the most important things you can do.
I absolutely love that. I started my career on the shop floor, and held me in great stead ever since. So it's a wonderful thing to do and to keep going back to as well. You talked, super humble in the experiences and what you're sharing, and I wondered if there's moments in time where you've either been apprehensive or maybe made mistakes, and perhaps what are the key things and learnings that you've had from those lows, as well as the incredible highs that you've had?
Oh, goodness me, loads and loads. I think it kind of, I wouldn't say I've ever found there are any kind of big sort of tricky chunks in you have kind of good days and bad days. I think I suppose the theme for me would be, if there's ever anything I've sort of got wrong, it's usually because we haven't gone fast enough or gone with enough kind of, at the time sometimes when you're making bold decisions or kind of, I don't know, transform into a new campaign or bring out a new ray or whatever it happens to be, you feel like at the time, because you're in it, and because it feels like the stakes are quite high, you feel like you're being incredibly bold and kind of, stretching actually. And there's lots of people that often say, "Oh, I expect risky," whatever. But I think my general feeling is that when you know it's the right thing to do and you've got good data potentially backing you up, really push harder. So I think the advice I'd give certainly to my younger self would be go harder actually, and push more on some of those things. That'd be the main thing.
Love it. Go hard or go home. Hey, we only get one go. So within that, I mean, I think, and I know that you're quite intelligently network and get advice and counsel. So how do you go about, getting mentors, getting a network? What role does that play, and how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a really important part of. I mean, there's kind of structured ways that you can do it. One of the things that I've found is that people, and I've been very lucky to have some amazing mentors. Not necessarily always that formal actually or structured, but just people that you ask for advice. And one of the things I found is that people generally are very, very happy and open to give you advice, support, share some of their wisdom, and I don't think I can think of a single time actually when I've asked someone whose opinion I value to give me some advice or support or help me with a problem, and they've said no. I can't think of a single time when that's happened. So if I haven't benefited from that support, it's because I haven't asked, basically. So I think that's the key thing is to really kind of reach out. And in some respects, there are no new problems, right? Everyone, if you're experiencing a thing that you think is really tough or challenging or complex, there'll be someone out there in your network who is able to give you that advice and support you. And the other thing I would say is that always, and I think most people do that. I never say no to someone who comes to me and asks for advice. Very rare, unless I happen to miss it or whatever. But I think having that openness to giving some support or counsel advice to other people often comes back to kind of replace. That's not the reason for doing it, but I think that's kind of how it works, really. I think.
And Nathan, you're really generous with that. I mean, just to shout out that, of course, you are a mentor with us at the mentoring program, which is great, and always paying it forward. I just want to come on to, you obviously had a big stint with M&S, and then, of course, now at Waitrose. But in between that, you were at House 337 as an executive director and spent time agency side as well. And I wonder, what role has that played in your thinking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love House 337 is a brilliant. It came from it was actually my advertising agency at M&S. Amazing guy called Nick Stickler who ran Odd, who were kind of more of a fashion specialist agency, part of the Next 15 group. And House 337 came about. We acquired Engine Group, so Engine Creative essentially. So it came from a bringing together two quite different businesses actually, a more established top 10 advertising agency with Odd, and my role was to work on that and advise that and work on a lot of the new business activity that was coming through in that space. But actually, more importantly, to kind of set up an ethical commerce business within that, which is still going today. So I loved it. Actually, it was an amazing. I mean, 10 years is a long time in one business actually, and it's a long time in retail. Retail's pretty. So it was an amazing thing to do something completely different and just to completely change the perspective. Work agency side, created something completely of my own actually. So for the first probably 3 or 4 months, I actually rented an office down the road here in Field and sat there like basically building the consultancy business, building all the new propositions, working out how it's going to work. I spent a lot of time with amazing people that I worked with in the sustainability space. Brought all that together with some of my sort of communications and marketing experience, and did it myself. And it was I'm incredibly proud of it. Actually, it was amazing. And then the next thing was to go, right, how do we? And of course, we worked very closely with M&S, which was helpful. So it's always good to have a first client on the way as well. But then basically take that proposition out and work with other people. So it was an amazing experience. I would say that I don't think it was the right thing for me long term actually. So I was lucky that Waitrose came to me and kind of said that we're looking potentially for a new customer director. Otherwise, I'd probably still be at house, very, very happy actually, and enjoying it. But I'm a better customer director or CMO, I think, than running something agency side. To be honest, so I think I'm very lucky that I'm very grateful that the sort of Waitrose came our way. It's an amazing brand. But that experience was phenomenal, and I'd recommend it to anyone who is thinking of sort of switching from one side to the other. I would 100% recommend spending some time agency side. It's incredible. You meet some brilliant people.
Yeah, I think you're much more. I never did it, but I think you'd be much more worldly wise for having both sides of the equation. Within there was a little thread, Nathan, about ethical and sustainability. And we're seeing more CMOs and customer directors having more direct responsibility for sustainability. What role does that play for you? What's your perspective on how sustainability is impacting marketing?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly for Waitrose, it's incredibly important. So, one of the things about the journalist partnership is the values of the organization run very, very deep in the business, and we talk about them a lot. And one of the things I sometimes say to the team is, almost every day is someone's first day in the business. So therefore, we've got to be talking about our values every day, because otherwise they kind of just disappear into the background. So it's a really, really important part of what we do and what makes the brand what makes the brand special. Actually, I think, certainly for anyone who's in food or food retail, we've got there's a problem with the food system, basically. Like, if you just zoom right out kind of globally and look at the way we produce, consume, and to some degree market our food, it's a fundamentally broken system. And somehow as a species, we've got to fix it, because we can't keep on going the way we are. And that's partly some of the concerns around things like global warming, but everything from topsoil to some of the ingredients in our food to the health crisis that we've got, not just in the UK but also across most of the developed world. Something's got to change, right? So just to come meander slowly back to your actual question, Mark, if customer teams and marketing teams aren't leading that change, who else will, actually, in the organization? So our job is to bring the outside in and project. There's really two questions: what sort of business do we want to be in the future, and how are we going to get there? And if we're not thinking about those things, who else will be, actually, in the organization? So I think it's an important part of the leadership role that we have to play as a function business.
Nathan, I want to come on to a point around when you talk about leadership. What would you say is your leadership style? And what would some of your colleagues potentially say about your style of leadership?
You have to ask them. You have to ask them, Richie. I mean, I think I've probably mellowed a bit over time. I was certainly, so I think about going back, 10 years or whatever, I was definitely very, very outcome driven. So I've always been very, very focused on the outcome. I think what I've learned is, over a period of time, is that you can't, number one, you can't do it yourself, right? So you can't do everything. We've all worked for leaders where they think that the answer to every problem is more input from them. That's we've all worked for those. And the reality is, number one, you can't do it yourself. But number two, the thing I've really learned is that it's better if you haven't done it yourself. Actually, like, it's actually, you get a better outcome for the problem that you're trying to solve, or the opportunity you're trying to go for. But also, it's a much more enduring change that kind of people feel ownership of over a period of time. And I think that's something that I've definitely learned, and probably also just to be a bit more patient, actually, at times. Because patience isn't necessarily always part of the MO, because you want to move fast and move quickly. But someone said to me once, dreams are microwavable. Sometimes these things take a little bit of time, and and a bit of a little bit of patience to get it right. So definitely man in that sort of thing. But I think my one of the pieces of feedback which I've had since I started at Waitrose is someone said to me that the team now know what they need to do to be successful, and hopefully what I try and do at least is give a general sense of where we want to get to, and give a degree of clarity about kind of the direction that we need to get after, but give people, hopefully with relatively clear accountabilities, the opportunity to shape that path in a way that gives them a relatively high degree of autonomy. So that's what I try and do. Whether or not I achieve it is a different conversation.
No, nice. I love that as well. Dreams aren't microwavable. Might steal that one with pride. You can rest assured on that. So I mean, Nathan, the time has zipped by. So we've come to the final question of the session, and I suppose it's looking to the future. You've got plenty of years left in you yet. So what are your hopes and dreams, aspirations? What have you still yet to learn or achieve?
Oh, a lot. I've always somebody was asking about this last night. Actually, I've never really had a plan as far as career is concerned. Genuinely, I've always felt that if you enjoy what you're doing and are fulfilled by it, and kind of go to bed every night counting your blessings and wake up with a sense of purpose, is kind of my kind of feeling about stuff. Good things come. Good things happen. So I've never really. I've always worried about making sure that I'm doing the best job I can in the job that I'm doing, and I'm never worried too much about the future. To be honest with you, in that sense, that it kind of, I just sort of, so I guess somehow assume that everything's gonna be all right. That's kind of how I generally think about stuff. But look, I mean, I guess in the immediate term, I've got an amazing job. I'm incredibly lucky, so I want to do the best job I can do in this role now, and I'd love to stay in the partnership for a period of time. I genuinely think it's one of the most amazing businesses in the world, partly driven by the ownership model and the values and the history of the business, but also has the potential for an amazing future. So I'd love to stay what I'm doing now. Don't have a massive aspiration, to be honest, to kind of go into general management or other sectors. Like lots of people say, I want to do, yeah, maybe that might happen one day, but that's not something that I'm sort of desperate to do. I'm enjoying what I'm doing now and kind of happy to keep doing it. Sounds like a bit of a politician's answer, doesn't it? That, but
yeah, what a lovely way to end. I mean, it's sort of, there's a bit of a theme that I'll come on to when I do a recap about sort of going with the flow at times. But enjoy it for what it is. Who knows what's around the corner? And it's, I think, good to be ambitious in general sense, but to be, too voracious about it can be a thing. Well, Nathan, I mean, fabulous. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm going to put a bit of a bow on it for everybody, just in terms of some of the key things. There's quite a lot to reference, actually. I mean, my overall sense is that you're a very grounded person, and sincere in a very good way. And there's kind of a bit of a flow to how you come across. But I'm going to try and pull out some of the nuggets and top tips. We started by hearing that you are outcome driven, so you are results oriented, and that there's this sweet spot, the intersection of personal growth and business growth, and that's sort of where that was my first sort of inkling of the way you talked about flow. We also then heard about psychology degree in neuroscience, and then this lovely thing. I think I'd vaguely heard of it, but to be a Red Bull student brand manager, I mean, well, you must have been one of the most popular people on campus or in the university. But also, what an amazing grounding, real, genuine experience of what marketing's all about. Because a lot of people fall into marketing, don't even know what the hell it is. So, what a great thing there. And hopefully, you've got a sort of lifetime supply of Red Bull within that as well. Very interesting perspective about the superpower of novelty and bringing ideas and vitality at the beginning of a career. Also about radiator or Dre. I'm not sure that's a Tesco thing. I've heard that a few times over, but how powerful it is. And I've seen the lights go on for some people when they've heard of the concept and realised that they might be the drain in the room. So very powerful. Talked a little bit about refreshing and the holiday refresh. And then you talked about the gravitational pull of being internally focused. I think that's very, very true, particularly with tenure. So a good watch out there. Main mistake, maybe not going fast enough, go harder. Networking, just ask for the advice. There are no new problems, so you don't have to guess. Had a brief sojourn into agency side, and you'd encourage people to switch sides. Talking a bit about ethics, and then I love this thought: every day is somebody's first day in the organisation. I know the army talk every week about their values as a sort of ritualistic thing, but I've never heard about talking about the values every single day. And then we heard, of course, that dreams aren't microwavable, so sometimes things take time and require a bit of patience. And then enjoy it. Live for the moment. Never really had a plan. I'm sure you kind of got some inklings, but enjoy it for what it is. So Nathan, it's been a real pleasure to hear your insights and thoughts this morning. So thank you very much for your time on behalf of Richie, myself, and everybody listening in.
No, you're welcome. It's great to see you. Thank you.